My name is Cassian Vale. I have been alive for a very long time, long enough to have been there. I keep the things people handed me and never came back for. Tonight, I'll show you one. 129 men sailed into the top of the world. I am the only one who walked out. This is a fork. Sterling silver, a family crest on the handle. Its owners were officers of the Royal Navy, and officers did not eat off tin. It is bent here at the tines, bent from being dragged across 200 miles of ice by a starving man who would not put it down. It belonged to a lieutenant named Graham Gore, the kind of man every room turns toward, good at everything, easy about it, the sort you assume will outlive you. He gave me his coat the first winter because I was pretending to feel the cold and said I'd thank him by spring. He was wrong about the spring. The ice did not kill those 129 men. Everyone says the ice. You'll have heard about the lead in the tins too. What killed them was a map. Beautiful, confident, half-imagined, showing a passage that did not exist yet. They did not sail into danger. They sailed into a certainty. Confidence is the warmest thing in the world, and up there, warmth is the lie that kills you. I sailed with them. I watched the finest crew the Empire could assemble march off 2 good ships, in good order, singing toward nothing. What they did when they finally understood is the most human thing I have ever seen. The summer of 1845, the ships left England to Cheering. Erebus and Terror, names that sound like doom now, but back then just proud old bomb ships rebuilt for the ice, steam engines, warm air piped below decks, a library of 1,200 books. They carried Sir John Franklin, 59 and beloved, an Arctic veteran once so hungry on an earlier march that men called him the man who ate his boots. He told the story himself, laughing. Good stories are dangerous. They make the next disaster sound survivable. I stood on Erebus's deck as we pulled away, and what I remember is not fear. There was none. Commander James Fitzjames captained Erebus under Franklin, handsome, funny, writing letters home about the officers' dinners. He leaned on the rail and said we'd be done in a season, 2 at most, and sail out the far side into the Pacific like coming through a garden gate. Ages before, far to the north of anywhere, I had watched ice-eat expeditions the way Vesuvius ate a town. But you cannot tell a laughing man on a summer deck that some of the men around him are already dead. So I offered the one small truth that would fit. The ice does not care how good your ship is. Fitzjames said, then it's fortunate we have 2. The last Europeans to see them alive were whalers in Baffin Bay at the end of that first summer. What came after, the world pieced together decades later, from a single sheet of paper, a scatter of bones, and 3 graves. The first winter they sheltered at Beechy Island, and it went, by their standards, well. Except that 3 men died, young men, the first a stoker named John Torrington, 20 years old, who tended Terror's engine. They buried him in the frozen ground with a proper headboard, limbs bound gently with strips of cotton, the way you'd settle a sleeper. 2 more followed before the light came back. But it is the boy I helped bury that I have never put down. I helped dig. The ground up there does not thaw. You quarry a grave, you do not dig one. And what troubled me, standing over him, was how he had wasted, 20 years old and light as a bundle of sticks. The surgeons wrote consumption, and they were partly right. But I had watched him on winter visits between the ships, going strange and slow at Terror's mess table, and I had watched all of us eat from the same bright new tins, 3 years of food solid shut with lead, leaching slow and sweet and invisible into the meat and the men. I did not have the word for it. Nobody did, and the people who dug them up a century on still argue over what those tins did and did not do. All I knew was that something was making careful men careless, officers forgetting the ends of their own sentences, and that you cannot tell a crew to stop eating the only food they have. Then came the summer the ice did not open. That is the whole catastrophe, and I want you to feel how quiet it is. No storm, no wreck, no single terrible night. They had sailed south into a channel. In September, the sea froze around the hulls, and in the summer that should have freed them, the thaw did not come far enough. Held. A second winter in the same square mile of frozen sea. Nobody dramatizes this death. It has no face, just ice declining to become water at the moment your life depends on it. Franklin had sailed his certainty into a corner of the map where certainty meant nothing, and the map had no answer for what if the ice keeps you. Sir John Franklin died in that held ship in June of 1847. Vain, I always thought, in the way of men praised too long, but he died still believing they would get through, and that was a mercy. He never had to make the choice the others made. Command passed to Francis Crozier, the Irishman, a harder, sadder, more honest man, an Antarctic veteran who had sailed already sorrowing, writing to friends as if he did not expect to come home. Of all the officers, only he was carrying the truth, and the truth up there weighs more than a man can stand. By the third spring, the men had been held a year and a half without moving, and the lead and the cold and the hunger had done their slow work. Crozier made the only decision left: abandon the ships, walk out, drag the boats overland south toward a river 250 miles off, a river whose nearest help lay another 1,000 miles up it, and hope. They left one note, in a cairn on the shore of King William Island, a standard Admiralty form filled out twice. The first time, a year earlier, all well. The second time, cramped around the edges of the same page, a different story. The world calls it the Victory Point Record. It sits in Greenwich today, and in its margins you can read the exact place where the Empire's confidence ran out.
HM ships, Terror and Erebus, were deserted on the 22nd of April, 5 leagues north-northwest of this, having been beset since 12th of September 1846. The officers and crews, consisting of 105 souls, landed here under the command of Captain Crozier. Sir John Franklin died on the 11th of June 1847, and the total loss by deaths in the expedition has been to this date 9 officers and 15 men. James Fitzjames, Captain, HMS Erebus, and start on tomorrow, 26th, for Backsfish River.
That last line is in Crozier's hand. The note is dated the 25th of April, 1848, and it is the last word any of them ever wrote. Everything after that, the world had to read in the snow. I walked out with them. Of course I did. And I will be careful here. This is where the story usually turns lurid, and I will not do that to them. They were the best trained sailors of the finest navy afloat, dying on their feet, and they behaved, for a very long time, with an order that breaks my heart. They dragged the ship's boats on sledges, heavy oak over the ice, aimed at open water that never came. And into those boats they packed things that could not possibly help. Silk handkerchiefs, books, bottles of button polish. And the silver. The officers had shared out their crested forks and spoons among the seamen before the march. Carry the name, if nothing else. So the silver went south 200 miles in starving men's hands. The clever explanation is that they were mad with lead, maybe. But I was there, and I will tell you what I saw. I saw Harry Peglar, a captain of the foretop, carry his packet of papers until his hands could not close. I saw men keep the silver because it was the last proof that they had ever been civilized men with names and not a line of shapes dying in a white nothing. They were not carrying treasure. They were carrying who they had been. When you are down to the last thing, you find out it was never about the weight. They dropped along that shore one at a time. A tent, found later, held the neat remains of men who had lain down in order. A boat held 2 who stayed with it to the end, with a chocolate ration, a pile of the silver, and 2 loaded guns, waiting for a rescue that had turned back. Gore, my friend, whose coat I still had, was already among the dead by the time of the note. I stayed until staying changed nothing. Then I did the one thing only I could do and turned north out of the story. I never gave the coat back, a small grief. It is nearly 180 years old now. England could not believe it. 129 men of the Royal Navy do not simply stop. They sent dozens of ships over a decade, more men and money hunting the lost than had ever been lost. Lady Franklin, his widow, spent her fortune and her remaining life refusing to let them be forgotten because she understood the one duty that outlasts a death. Somebody has to keep the name. And the Inuit knew. They were the only people the Arctic had ever agreed to keep alive, and they had watched the starving men stagger south. They told the searchers plainly what they had seen, even the unbearable part, what hunger finally drove the last of them to. England, certain to the end, refused to believe them. The map's final casualty. Even in death, these men were trusted, and the ones who knew were not. The ships were found in my own recent memory, not in the last century, this one. Erebus in 2014, Terror in 2016, both far south of where the note says they were left, nearly whole on the seafloor, in the cold, clean dark, almost exactly where Inuit testimony had placed them all along. Divers swim Erebus's decks now. And on Terror, a camera found Crozier's cabin, the one door on the ship still shut, his desk still closed, whatever he wrote at the end still inside it. Those men learned, at the very end, the thing that every certain age is last to learn. The map is not the world. They had a map, a good one, drawn by brilliant men, and they trusted it more than they trusted the ice under their own boots, because the map was warm and confident, and the ice was only real. And when the world and the map disagreed, they kept faith with the map. All the way down. That is not stupidity. I have watched it end 1,000 expeditions, and I have felt it in myself. The terrible human preference for the plan over the fact, for the story we were told about how this goes, over the thing that is actually happening. But you can see them learn it in the silver they refused to drop. When the map failed and the passage closed and the food ran out, they stopped being men marching to a destination and became, at the last, just men, carrying the proof of each other's names across the snow. Everything the map promised, gone. Everything that mattered, a friend's coat, a crest, a name, carried to the last step. I do not get to learn that lesson the way they did. I never run out, never reach the last thing and discover what it was. That is the cost of my long life. I have envied few men more than the ones who lay down on that shore, knowing at last exactly what they were carrying and why. This is Graham Gore's Fork. Bent at the tines, dragged 200 miles by a starving man who would not leave it, because leaving it meant admitting the man it belonged to was gone. Gore gave me his coat and told me I'd thank him by spring. I have carried this through every winter since. It is the spring I never got to give him back. They are gone. And a kept name is the only rescue that reaches this far, so keep one of theirs. Gore will do. That is all I ask, and it is everything. The next thing I set on this table will be a key. It fit a gate in a wall that had never fallen, 1100 years, and it had never fallen, in a city called Constantinople on the last morning it existed. Come and stand on the wall with me. The candle stays lit.